Hello again, everyone. You're joining us for another episode of Executive Platforms Blueprint podcast series. My name is Jeff Mix. I'm head of content and research with Executive Platforms. My guest today is Yash Sabharwal of QbDVision. We're going to be having a conversation about a collaborative approach for service and solution providers working in the life sciences space, and of course, QbDVision specifically as well. Yash, thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you for having me.
I've had the pleasure of speaking with you in the past and also your colleague Luke, and one of the things that I really enjoy about your organization is that you're not this is the piece of software we have to offer biopharmaceutical executives, and this is what it does. You're very much, how can we be part of a larger conversation to help everybody help this industry? I wonder if we can speak about that at the top, that sort of philosophy of collaboration.
Yeah, so the software that we have been developing is intended to promote collaboration within organizations that use it. Coming from the pharmaceutical world myself, previously was always struggling with and frustrated with the challenges that I saw in my organization, where the different departments just didn't have the capability and the tools to collaborate in a way that they could share information and see what each other were doing, right? And so when we started the QbDVision project, we not only wanted to build a platform for the chemistry, manufacturing, and controls work streams that every company has to deal with. We not only want to build a platform for that, but we also wanted to build it in a way that that allows all the different departments within a pharmaceutical or biotech organization to have visibility into the overall knowledge base that they're building, and use that as a collaborative way to be more efficient overall, right? Now that extends, I think, to the industry itself, the service providers. We believe that because the industry is sort of a laggard, if you will, in its adoption of digital solutions and digital technologies to drive operational efficiency, there's a lot of opportunity, but also a lot of education that's required to get people past their documents and into more digital capabilities. And there's also plenty of opportunity for all the vendors to be very successful in their sort of revenue ambitions, if you will. So we're very much a grow the pie, not grow the slice type of organization, and we've been trying to encourage that with our conversations with a variety of partners, trying to connect the overall ecosystem of solutions, because no one solution provider is going to solve the problem. So.
And I love that philosophy. I really enjoy the idea that you're looking at maybe quality in the CMC piece, but there's supply chain issues, there's inventory issues, there's data management in all kinds of different facets, and why can't the data flow through everyone sort of using the same infrastructure and underpinnings?
That's correct. And even it's a regulatory imperative now too. The time for document-based or paper-based information management is sort of behind us now. While the industry still has a lot of that approach, the regulators now are actually ahead of the industry, which is not something that happens often. But when it comes to managing data, thinking about it digitally, not just electronically, thinking about it from an integrity perspective, they're very focused now on not only what is the data, but how can I trust that that's the actual data, right? These all beg for newer solutions which automate these. Like, you can leverage cloud-based technologies. There's so many things that you can do now today that just automate this stuff for you, so you can get back to the business of focusing on the science and not focusing on where's my information, how do I find my information, is this information I can trust, so on and so forth. And so these are some of the imperatives now that are coming forward from a regulatory perspective that people have to pay attention to.
And I think it always is worth repeating, the people who are passionate enough to build their careers in this space, they didn't do it to work from a clipboard, put things into Excel, print things out, put it in a filing cabinet. 3 months later, I've got to fill out that form. Where is it in the filing cabinet? Let them solve problems. Let them actually do the medicine.
Yeah, that's right. And this year, the conference was kicked off by a panel, right? And one of the big discussions was talent and workforce, right? And I think everybody across the industry is experiencing challenges with staffing, right? And how do you bring in people? How do you bring in people that are experienced, with what you're doing? And so you don't want to be wasting people's time having them looking for information all the time, right? As we've been deploying our platform across the industry, one of the things that we hear is that just simple things like the quality of a meeting is much higher because now we're actually spending the time talking about the information that's in front of us as opposed to spending time during the meeting looking for the information that we need to actually have the conversation, right? So simple things like that, I think, help really with the overall experience for people, right? And allows them to kind of focus on the science, right? And getting therapies to patients faster as opposed to the drudgery of dealing with Excel spreadsheets and Word documents.
Before we get into QbDVision specifically, I would love to talk just a little bit more about this collaborative approach. I think your organization has been sort of a standard bearer for it for a while. For other service and solution providers who might be hearing this, what is a way they can get involved? What does getting started look like? How can they be part of a cumulative approach to some of these solutions rather than just trying to be, one individual fighting against all the other individuals for eyeballs and attention and eventually resources?
Well, that's a great question. So, a lot of vendors will host user conferences, right? So what they do is they bring in the users of their software or potential users of the software, and they have a conversation that tends to be very focused on what they're doing. And I feel like the challenge with that, or one of the problems, is that creates an echo chamber for you as a company, right? You tell people what you want to tell them, and you kind of end up hearing back generally what you want to hear because you sort of control the discussion that way, right? So when it was time for us to think about doing something like this, and we were coming out of COVID, we actually decided to say, well, you know what, we're going to do something different. As a vendor, we're going to host an industry summit that is open to everybody, right? And so people would say, well, as a vendor, that seems kind of crazy. What if competitors show up? And we say, well, look, it's even better if they show up, right? We have to have this conversation together. So there was no venue, and there is no venue until we started to do this for a conversation specifically related to this work stream of CMC, but also the digitalization of that work stream, right? So it's a very kind of focused conversation, but there's multiple layers in the tech stack, if you will, that are there to manage this. That's the digital ecosystem that we refer to. And so we created what we call the Digital CMC Summit. We hosted it in Austin last year, first time. And we invited people like Siemens and Rockwell and sponsors like drug companies and CDMOs. And so a lot of them came just to see what the conversation was going to be about. And we very much focused that conversation on the how, so not the what and the why. Everybody knows what we need to do and why we need to do it. But the question for people always is, well, how do I get started? How am I supposed to do this? How do I pull together all these different disparate digital things that are sitting in front of us, and where do I start, right? And so then we extended that to this year and again continued that theme. But the key thing that's come out of it is that it really engages debate and it gets people to see how other organizations are starting on this journey, and it's been very well received. So this is how you can get involved. Is that you can start to get involved in these types of activities, and try to getting your vendors to work together and talk to each other is something that you as a customer can do better than sometimes the vendors themselves can do that.
So let's talk about QbDVision specifically and how you're fitting into that ecosystem that you're helping to shape.
Sure. So one of the things that we see a lot is there's a lot of focus. So companies say, okay, we need to go digital. We need to get away from our spreadsheets and our paper records. And the first thing they do is they say, okay, well, we have a lot of primary data. And what I mean by primary data is the actual measurements, right? So the measurements of pH or the measurements of X or the measurements of Y. And so they have a lot of this primary sort of numerical, empirical data. And they say, okay, that's where we need to start, right? And our approach, and that's fine, and companies have been doing this for a while, where they've been building data hubs and data warehouses and data lakes to try to sort of assemble all the information that they capture in these primary data systems, so have one centralized repository to deal with that information, right? The challenge, of course, that they're running into now is that there's no context around that information. So if I look and I see, oh, well, here's a chromatogram from a from a method that we ran, a year ago. I can see who did it and the timestamp and so forth, but I don't understand the importance of this. Like this method, what is it? What is this going to ultimately test, right? And how critical is that thing that we're testing, right? Is it something that affects patient safety and efficacy, or does it not? And so that lack of context creates this other problem where people were like, we have all this data and we don't know what it means, right? So QbDVision was designed to really be a layer above primary data to say, let's bring context to this information. And it's very much aligned with what the regulators ultimately want to see. When you are developing a drug, ultimately the regulators want to understand, do you have the production of this under control at the level that we want to see it at, right? So you're telling a story of control to the regulators. And that story of control is something you build up over time. And we took that approach and all the guidelines that describe how you tell that story of control, and we built QbDVision as that platform. And then that platform it sits above primary data, and it provides the context to all that primary data that sits in these other systems. So that's really our objective, and we're starting to see now this movement towards solving this particular problem, where people say lots of data, don't know what a lot of this means, don't even know where to start with parsing it.
I was really interested earlier when you mentioned it feels almost like the regulators are ahead of the industry in this space, and this is an industry that famously wants to view compliance as the starting line. They want to be ahead of the curve.
Right.
So I can see this as being a very immediate concern, digitizing, and so maybe the next question should be, what does getting started look like, and what's a realistic timeline to make that kind of transition from the old way of doing things to a system like QbDVision?
Yeah, so we had this very conversation at our summit a couple of weeks ago where that's always a big question, like where do I get started, right? And what we also often see is that companies, they do these big road mapping exercises, right? To say, well, we need X and we need Y, and we need to figure out how X and Y are going to talk to each other, and all the framework around it. And it turns out that people spend a lot of time road mapping and not actually doing anything, right? And what has been proven to be a better approach is to pick a place and just get started, right? Pick something and say, okay, we're going to start here, right? And then instead of starting, meaning that you spend a year deploying a platform, right? You instead say, let's just do like a 1-month project with this thing, right? And you prioritize. Say, I'm going to do this because this is the most important thing. And so it's more of an agile methodology to say we're going to do something a little bit, and it'll cause a little disruption, but it won't cause a big disruption because you're trying to roll out this massive platform. And so you do it in little chunks, and you see, okay, we have this pain point, let's solve it. Then how did that go, right? And then you come back and you do the next one and the next one and the next one. So what ends up happening is that when you take this agile approach, which is how software companies develop their software as well, you learn as you're deploying and you adjust, right, to make sure that you're not, going in a direction you don't want to go in. Whereas if you do it the old way, which is you spend an entire year rolling something out and then you start to use it, and then people go, well, this is actually not what we wanted. But then they're kind of upset. It's like, we just wasted a whole year and all this money doing this. So we tell people, get started, right? And then just do it in a very agile way. Be flexible. It's hard for the industry because they don't think that way generally, right? It's a very locked down, kind of regulatory heavy environment. But this approach actually is not, people think it's contradictory, but it's actually complementary to it.
I can see as you're walking through this that it's very bespoke, customizable. It's going to differ from place to place what their priority is. And I have to think, working with an organization like QbDVision, it's collaborative. This isn't a turnkey thing that you've sold them. You're helping them along the way. Can we talk about sort of that relationship?
Yeah, so one of the things that we knew from the perspective of building successful business was that we didn't want to get into the business of building customized solutions, right? So one of the challenges that we knew we needed to solve as a going concern was that we needed to have an out-of-the-box solution that threaded the needle between structure and flexibility, right? So QbDVision is not a configurable solution in the sense that you can't turn features on and off, The features are there. You decide whether you want to use them or not. But what we have done is we have built a structure that allows you to put, whatever you want to put in there that's relevant to your programs, right? So the information. So we give you the buckets. You put what you want to do, put in the buckets, right? And that way, it allows you for the flexibility to deal with different therapeutic modalities. So if you want to build a gene therapy project in our platform, you can do that. If you want to build a monoclonal antibody project in our program, you can do that. We can handle all the different therapeutic modalities. You could build a pizza making process in our platform or a beer brewing process in our platform, right? But what we have done, as you said, the structure that we provide to you is not is not flexible, and that structure is based on the regulatory requirements, right? So you need to define product requirements. What those requirements are, that's up to you. You need to define a process. What that process is up to you, right? And you need to define test methods. What those methods are up to you. So that was the needle we had to thread, and in that way, we're giving you something that's out of the box, but you put, it's flexible for you to design whatever process you're developing in our platform. That still requires some level of interaction from our team to just help people understand a new way of doing what they've been doing in the past. But it's actually going quite well, right? We wouldn't be successful as a business if we were just doing customized solutions for people. Right. And I think the industry's kind of tired of that. They've tried that route, and they find that just doesn't work that well.
Now, we've covered a lot of ground here. I mean, we started off in collaborating in an ecosystem of service and solution providers, and then moved into specifically, the quality and CMC space, and then digitization. For people who have been listening all the way through this, are there one or two key things that you want to highlight for them, and maybe they can think about a little further after this episode is over?
Yeah, I mean, I think the key question again always is, where do we start, right? And if you take a step back and look at all the things that you have to do, it's overwhelming. So I think the key thing for organizations to think about that want to get started on this journey is to identify where are some of your biggest challenges today, right? That are a result of lack of digitalization. Perfect example that we're seeing more broadly is the challenges of tech transfer. Tech transfer is a very manual process. It's very document-based. So it's a situation where I'm a company, I've developed a process, I want to hire you as a contract manufacturer to run this process and do it at a higher scale. And I say, look, here's a bunch of documents, right? You can read through it and figure out what we did, right? Well, that leads to tech transfers taking anywhere from 12 to 24 to 36 months. These are very long timelines that really reduce or they slow down how quickly a therapy gets to market, right? And there's a lot of costs associated with that. And so that's an area that the industry is focusing on, is how can we take a digital approach to going from 24 months to 6 months, right? So figure out those places in your operations that could really benefit from a digital approach. And reach out to vendors. There's a lot of work that's going on in the space, and I think and the vendors are willing to talk to you, not just to sell you a platform, but also to work with you and collaborate around what's the best way to go about doing that.
For people who have been listening to this and do have some questions, want to learn more, start a conversation, what's the best way to get in touch?
Just come to our website, QbDVision.com. There's a lot of resources there. We post all of our content from these summits on demand. We also have a lot of great white papers and blog posts and other content where you can read and just learn everything that we're doing and what other people are doing and where they're having successes and how to get started.
All right. Well, I encourage everyone to visit that website. I know I look at it every time I come to one of these events. I've had the pleasure of speaking with you and your colleagues in the past. This has been so much fun. Thank you so much for joining me today.
Thank you, Jeff. I appreciate the opportunity.
You've been listening to another episode of Executive Platform's Blueprint podcast series. I've been Jeff Mix. Let's do it again soon.